Louisville burns as people find out what the verdict was going to be on whether cops were going to get charged in the Breonna Taylor case. We will talk a bit about what's going on there. President Trump says something insanely stupid in a press conference. We'll review what's going on there. Hillary Clinton also says something insanely stupid that has no bearing in reality. And California attempts to ban gas-powered cars. I'm Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. Good morning, folks, and welcome to Contemporary. My name is Jay Edgar. We've got a bunch of stuff to get to. Another city is going to burn, and it appears it already has burned. So we're going to talk a bit about what happened there, how we got to this point. I am not going to go over the major details of the Breonna Taylor case, because we've talked that one to death, but I will talk about the current news about what got charged, why it got charged there, and what has happened in the aftermath. Plus, a bunch of other stuff here that came up right before we found out about this. But before we get into any of that, head on over to freedomscoop.com. Freedomscoop.com is going to be your one-stop shop for all of your news and commentary needs. We carry great shows such as The Generational Gap, The Breakdown with Birkenhoff, The Daily Ignoramus, The Already Conservative, who is on a bit of a hiatus right now as he travels back home, getting ready to move, and The Freckles and Brit Show. So go over there and check them out. Pick up some of our swag and help us support great creators. Alright, you had to know it was coming, especially with what happened over in Louisville today, but we saw a big stock slide yesterday. Down and down and down it went. Slowly, but down. We're down about 2 percentage points over the day before, which is unfortunate. And it looks like it's going to continue going, which is probably going to be the case because more businesses are in the process of being burned down right now. And I'm not sure how long we're going to keep seeing these protests going on over in Louisville, but we will see them keep going. Let's see what IBD has to say about this. Extend your access 4 weeks for $24.95. Well, I've never purchased access, so I don't know where you're saying extend from, but let's see what they have to say here. Dow Jones Futures stock market sells off bearishly. Tesla extends battery day dive. From Ed Carson, Dow Jones Futures and S&P 500 futures turned lower Thursday morning, while Nasdaq futures fell solidly. After the stock market sold off sharply on Wednesday, the Nasdaq hit key resistance, along with Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, AMD, and Netflix. Tesla stock tumbled after Tesla Battery Day and the formal unveiling of the Volkswagen ID4. I didn't even know that was happening. I'm going to look into that. I think Volkswagens are kind of cool. I've never owned one. I've always been interested in them. Plus, you can find European cars that still have a standard transmission. So I've always been a little bit interested in them, but for the most part, they're not practical for winter around here, especially going up where I go. So I've never really bit the bullet on buying one, but I've always been a little bit curious about them. The stock market ended a losing streak Tuesday with a promising advance, but Wednesday's sharp losses suggest Tuesday's move was a head fake before a new batch of selling. Of course, the major indices and leading stocks could bounce back, but the choppy stock market environment is difficult to prosper in. The Nasdaq Composite was turned back just shy of the 50-day and 10-week moving averages. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, AMD, and Netflix stocks also hit resistance around those lines. Meanwhile, Tesla plunged after its long-hyped battery day failed to excite, while Volkswagen priced its ID4 crossover well below the Model Y and even the Model 3. Blowout Nike earnings helped the Dow Jones and S&P 500, but those indices fell sharply as well. Microsoft and Tesla are on the IBD leaderboard. Microsoft stock is on the IBD long-term leaders. AMD, Netflix, Microsoft, and Amazon are on the IBD 50 list. On the futures, Dow futures slid 0.2% versus fair value, erasing modest gains. S&P 500 futures fell 0.3%. Nasdaq 100 futures retreated 0.85%, almost a full percentage point, with Apple and Tesla stock continuing to slide. Remember, Pre-market action in Dow futures and elsewhere doesn't necessarily translate into actual trading in the next regular stock market session. Dow Jones futures were solidly positive early Wednesday, but that didn't hold up through regular trading. So, we will see what happens through the stocks on the day. And as Louisville continues to burn, let's find a counter to this and see what else we have going. And then we will move into the news. Dow futures fall 100 points as September market slide continues from Fred Imbert and Pippa Stevens. Stock futures were lower on Thursday after AS traders braced for another downbeat session in what has been a tough month on Wall Street. I don't know if they couldn't decide on if it was after or as. Some of the editing I see on these, because I read some of the same ones every day, and just some of the stuff that makes it past the editors kind of astounds me. Dow Jones Industrial Average futures dropped 119 points, or 0.4%. S&P 500 futures slid 0.5%, and NASDAQ 100 futures were down by 1%. Facebook shares traded 1% lower, and Amazon fell almost another 1%. Apple dipped 1.4%, and Netflix pulled that back by 0.5%. Alphabet declined 0.7%, and Microsoft lost 0.6%. The moves came in an uneven session. Earlier, futures opened Wednesday evening in the green, but comments from President Trump that he would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power should he lose the election appeared to hit sentiment. Pretty sure that happened after the market closed. Excuse me. Investors are concerned about a drawn-out election result. Stocks continued their September swoon during regular trading hours on Wednesday, with all of the major averages registering steep losses. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed 525.05 points, or 1.9% lower, reversing the 176-point gain from earlier in the session. The S&P 500 declined 2.4%, while the NASDAQ Composite shed 3%. There wasn't one specific reason to explain the selling, and in many ways, the slump was a continuation of price action that's been underway since the start of the month, said Adam Crisafulli of Vital Knowledge. He noted that tech trade, which cracked earlier in September, has yet to recover. Psychology around the group shifted, and it's no longer a stalwart source of support it once was. Meanwhile, investors still aren't comfortable enough with the cyclical value stocks to even begin to offset ongoing tech weaknesses, he added. Yeah, I like that. There wasn't one specific reason. It's kind of like when the police officers got shot last night. And the first headline that you saw off of that was, police officer shot. It's unclear whether the shooting was connected to the riots. Yeah, sure. It's unclear whether or not that was connected. I do think a lot of the sell-off that we're seeing here had to do with the results that we saw coming out of Louisville. In fact, I'm almost positive of it. So, we will watch what's happening here. Let's head on over into Louisville and see what they've got going on there, according to the mainstream news. And we will start today with CNN. Outrage over lack of charges on Breonna Taylor's death turns into protests across the U.S. From Madeline Holcomb and Steve Almasi. Yeah, I'm going to go with Almasi on that one, over at CNN. Excuse me. Outrage and heartbreak boiled over into protests in cities across the U.S. on Wednesday after news broke that none of the 3 officers involved in Breonna Taylor's death were charged with her killing. More than 6 months after Taylor was shot to death, after Louisville police officers broke down the door to her apartment while executing a warrant, a grand jury decided to indict only one of the 3 officers involved on first-degree wanton endangerment charges. The charge applies to the risk put on Taylor's neighbors, but does not hold the officer responsible for her death. Excuse me. From Louisville to Los Angeles, Atlanta, and New York, masses of people congregated to protest the decision. Peaceful protests, mind you. Police in Portland declared protests gathered outside the Justice Center a riot. And in Seattle, 13 people were arrested after a night of multiple fires and protesters throwing glass, bottles, and fireworks at police, authorities said. But peacefully starting multiple fires and peacefully throwing glass bottles at police. Remember, it's all peaceful. We will go to our graves proclaiming that Breonna Taylor did not get justice from Kentucky Attorney General's office. Attorney for the Taylor family, Ben Crump told CNN's... Really? Ben Crump, you say? Where have we heard that name before? Why? Wasn't he the attorney for Jacob Blake? Why? Wasn't he the attorney for the family of George Floyd? Why? It appears to me I believe he was the attorney for Rayshard Brooks. Isn't that interesting? Taylor, a 26-year-old black emergency room technician and aspiring nurse, was described by relatives as a hard-working, goal-oriented young woman who placed an emphasis on family. Crump said demonstrations over her death were righteous anger. In anticipation of potential unrest, Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher signed an executive order setting a statewide 72-hour curfew starting at 9 p.m. Wednesday. Do I want to wait on this? Yes, I do. So, that's what we're going to see up off of this. Looks like, yes, the charges are going to come out. The charges were... There was one charge. So, apparently, from what we heard from the grand jury, there was... Or not from the grand jury, but from the evidence that was put forward, there was blood in the hallway, indicating that Breonna Taylor was shot in the hallway, not in her bed. Once again, I look at the case, and we don't know what happened with this. And I am not going to go over all of this. The report is out there, and people can read it. It's quite lengthy. It's about 93 pages. And it does show there are a lot of inconsistencies with the case. I have read the report. And there are a lot of inconsistencies with this. But the only charge is the fact that one of the officers was just firing willy-nilly every which fucking direction. And, I mean, we're seeing it all over Instagram right now. Well, the Walls got more justice than Breonna Taylor did. Well, no, that was more of who might have been on the other side of the Walls. Because the idiot was firing left and fucking right. Like a moron who has no trigger discipline. That guy should definitely 100% be gone, because if he's just gonna bam, 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 all over the place as he's getting shot at, then yes, he does not need to be carrying a firearm in the service of the state. Absolutely not. Now, mind you, there should be a lot fewer people carrying firearms in the service of the state, but we need to get rid of some of the laws before we can get to that point, and that would be a perfect utopia, but we got to repeal a lot of these laws before we get there. But after reading the report, I'd be very curious to see what the decision was from the grand jury and what charges were brought forward and how they came to the determination that there was no need for additional indictments, but that's something we're going to have to wait on at this point. So, let's keep going here. I've got one archived from the Courier-Journal because it's owned by the USA Today, and the USA Today will not allow you to read their articles with an ad blocker on. Thank you, archive.today. Louisville grand jury indicts one of 3 officers in fatal Breonna Taylor police shooting. From Darcy Costello and Tessa Duvall. A Jefferson County grand jury has indicted one of 3 Louisville officers in the March 13th fatal police shooting of 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. It was announced on Wednesday. Former Detective Brett Hankinson was indicted on 3 counts of first-degree wanton endangerment. Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly was not indicted. Detective Miles Cosgrove was not indicted. A wanton endangerment charge is a Class D felony and carries a penalty of 1 to 5 years in prison. The charges read by Judge Annie O'Connell on Wednesday said that Hankinson wantonly shot a gun into adjoining apartment 3. The occupants of that apartment were identified by initials. None of them was BT, Breonna Taylor. That means the grand jury did not find that Hankinson wantonly fired into Taylor's apartment the night she died, or that any of the officers are criminally liable in her death. In May, Taylor's neighbor Chelsea Napper filed a lawsuit against the LMPD officers, claiming the officers shot were blindly fired and nearly struck a man inside. Napper was pregnant and had a child in the home, according to the lawsuit. The judge set a $15,000 cash bond for Hankson. A warrant has been issued for his arrest. Cameron said the grand jury decided homicide charges were not applicable because the investigation showed that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in returning deadly fire after they were fired upon by Kenneth Walker, Taylor's boyfriend, who has said he didn't know police were at the door. He said there was nothing conclusive to say that any of Hankinson's bullets hit Taylor. Justice is not often easy and does not fit the mold of public opinion and does not conform to shifting standards, Cameron said. I know that not everyone will be satisfied with the charges we've reported today. My team set out to investigate the circumstances surrounding Miss Taylor's death. We did it with a singular goal in mind, pursuing the truth. Kentucky deserves no less. The city of Louisville deserves no less. If we simply act on emotion or outrage, there is no justice. Mob justice is not justice. Wow. That's something you don't hear very often. Mob justice is not justice. Because mob justice, I'm pretty positive, is the reason that Kyle Rittenhouse is sitting in jail right now. Mob justice is, I'm pretty positive, the reason that dude killed himself from Omaha that we saw over on Monday. Mob justice has been used as a justification for a bunch of stuff right now. Cameron said he would create a task force to review the process of securing, reviewing, and executing search warrants in Kentucky. It will be a top-to-bottom review of the search warrant process, he said. Around 200 protesters gathered at Jefferson Square Park as the announcement was played on a loudspeaker. Yeah, because that's the way to do that. That's the way to prevent violence. Play an announcement like that on a loudspeaker. As the decision concluded, there was confusion at first, then anger from those who had gathered. Is that it? One woman asked. Protesters almost immediately began chanting, "No justice, no peace," because they don't have any other lines. You know, you could hire people to write new stuff for you because you've been just using the same lines over and over again. Several cried at the grand jury decision. I'm heartbroken, Logan Cleaver, a protester, said Wednesday, immediately after the grand jury's decision was announced. This is not a justice system if it's not for everybody. The announcement comes after Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron's office presented its findings to the grand jury earlier this week. His team has been investigating the Taylor shooting since May. In anticipation of Cameron's announcement, Mayor Greg Fisher invoked a 72-hour curfew, effective Wednesday night from 9 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. So, that's what we're seeing off of this. That's what the charges were. And yeah, that dude just blowing bullets randomly left and right. Probably should be indicted off of this, but if it's justified, and from everything I've read from the initial report that was released, the 93-page report, this was justified. The boyfriend shot towards the officers shot back. I can't see any other justification, but that's not going to matter to a lot of people that are out here. And with that, we will move on to the Daily Wire, talking about some of the other outrage from this. Ohio State President slams Breonna Taylor verdict. This does not feel like justice, from Hank Berrien. On Wednesday, a grand jury declined charges against the officers involved in the raid for the shooting death of Louisville resident Breonna Taylor, instead indicting one officer on 3 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree for firing his service weapon blindly through a door and window in Taylor's building. In response, Ohio State Pres. Dr. Christina M. Johnson posted a video statement on Twitter denouncing the decision. This does not feel like justice, wrote Johnson, citing a breakdown in the justice system. She added, this isn't going to stop until we create an anti-racist world. Breonna Taylor deserves justice. This does not feel like justice, said Johnson. We cannot accept what has happened in Louisville. We grieve the tragic and senseless loss of Breonna Taylor, a friend, a daughter, a niece, a loved one, who was unarmed and asleep. Why was she asleep in the hall? I don't understand that. The breakdown in the justice system and the killings of unarmed black and brown people in our country has become all too familiar, tragically. This isn't going to stop until we create an anti-racist world. We must come together to draw strength from each other and advance our collective vision for a better world where we'll one day have justice for all. There is much work to be done. Do we watch the video? Let's watch the video.
Breonna Taylor deserves justice, and this does not feel like justice. We cannot accept what has happened in Louisville. We grieve the tragic and senseless loss of Breonna Taylor, a daughter, a friend, a niece, a loved one, who was unarmed and asleep. The breakdown in the justice system and the killings of unarmed Black and brown people in our country has become all too familiar, tragically. This isn't going to stop until we create an anti-racist world. We must come together to draw strength from each other and advance our collective vision for a better world where we one day have justice for all. There is much work to be done.
Yeah, the whole concept of the anti-racist thing, that really kind of bothers me a little bit because, I mean, you look at it, what is anti-racist is that's arresting people for thought crime, is what that is. If you follow it to its natural conclusion. We're going to eliminate the racism by making it illegal to be a racist. That's anti-racism. Now, non-racist, I can agree with. Let's see if we can do something to try and convince people not to be a racist. But anti-racist, that's moving into some 1984 stuff. Aubrey Williams, former Louisville NAACP president and famed criminal defense lawyer who has served as former President Jimmy Carter's lawyer, disagrees. In an appearance on Fox News' Ingraham Angle, Williams said that murder charges against the officers would have been unwarranted. I was asked in the very beginning, and I said on the front page of the Courier-Journal, that number one, the no-knock warrant and the action of the officers were not illegal. Were they consistent with the law? Or they were consistent with the law, rather, Williams said. We have to understand, I said to the public, that the officers were acting under the Fourth Amendment, which says that no warrant should issue less by probable cause. They stated probable cause to a judge who signed the warrant because she trusted the good faith and explanation of the police officers, then did what they were directed to do. They had no alternative. If they had not gone to the house to serve the warrant, they would not have been doing their job. As a matter of fact, they could have possibly lost their jobs. It is unfortunate that this young lady was killed, but for the life of me, I don't see them indicting or convicting, Williams told the Courier-Journal, which noted that she had spent much of his 40-year career fighting police in court. In late July, but just because we have these brutal things that have happened to our people down through the ages, that doesn't mean the cops should be charged. And once again, the only people that know what went on are the people that were there that night. There was no body cam footage or anything else, but everything that's in the report was corroborated by neighbors. The fact that they knocked, the fact that they announced themselves, the fact that the boyfriend shot first. Unfortunately, that does seem to be the case in all of this, but yet a lot of the facts aren't going to matter. It's just like the Jacob Blake thing. People still don't care the fact that he was out there armed after being tased and walking away from the police. Nobody seems to care about that. They only care about the fact that a black man got shot by a police officer. And they can't even say unarmed black man at this point. So, still a bunch more going along with this. Let's keep going. I should have checked this one before we started, because I got to refresh this one a couple times. Bear with me with the on-air production here for just a second, because if I refresh this a few times, it'll tell me that I can continue without supporting, because I'm not turning my ad block off for NBC. Thank you. Alright, from NBC News, Breonna Taylor family lawyer blasts grand jury decision as a sham proceeding. Nothing seems to say Breonna mattered, attorney Ben Crump told the Today Show Thursday morning. Ben Crump, you say? Yes, we talked about this already. Civil rights lawyer Ben Crump, who represents Breonna Taylor's family, who also represented Jacob Blake's family, and George Floyd's family, and Rayshard Brooks' family. You noticing a pattern here? Blasted the Kentucky grand jury that decided not to charge any officers in her killing, calling it a sham proceeding that did nothing to give Breonna Taylor a voice. Crump, a member of the family's legal team, responded on NBC's Today on Thursday to the grand jury, delivering indictments only for charges of wanton endangerment against former police officer Brett Hankinson for firing shots that hit the apartment of one of Taylor's neighbors. No charges were made in the connection to multiple shots fired in the March 13th police raid that killed Taylor, a 26-year-old black woman. The wanton endangerment charge doesn't make sense, Crump said, adding that the indictment was in connection to bullets shot into a white neighbor's apartment. Race. That's all you have is race. But not for the bullets going into Breonna Taylor's body. Nothing seems to say Breonna mattered, Crump said of the decision announced on Wednesday. Louisville erupted in protest following the announcement as the downtown was filled with residents, outraged over the lack of charges related to Taylor's death. 2 police officers in the city were shot Wednesday night. Both are expected to recover. Crump said the anger expressed in the protests is shared by Taylor's family. They were outraged, they were insulted, and they were mostly offended, he said. We're trying to figure out what did the Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron present to the grand jury. Well, that is sealed. So you are going to need an act of God to figure that out, especially given the fact that the charges were dismissed. Don't try and change the constitutional makeup of this. There's a reason that grand jury indictments There's a reason that grand jury indictments are sealed. For the safety of people. And to prevent double jeopardy charges. So yes, absolutely, Benjamin Crump, go try and burn down the system and try and go and change that. Because it will not turn out well for you. Taylor, an EMT, was shot and killed in her home after police officers with a no-knock warrant broke down her door seeking evidence in a narcotics investigation. The target of the probe did not live at the location. Walker's boyfriend fired a shot at the front door, striking one of the officers in the leg. According to the police, Walker, who had a license to carry firearms, said he believed it was a home invasion. Crump dismissed the notion that the officers were firing in self-defense when Taylor was killed. Of course he did. Because that fires up the fucking rioters. The self-defense argument in Kentucky, as in many states across America, contemplates that you cannot use violence against a third party innocent bystander like Breonna Taylor, he said. Okay, from what I understand, this was crossfire. That she shouldn't have been there in the first place, but of course, this also is precluded on the fact that she wasn't actually in bed and sleeping when all this happened. Oh, this one's going to get messy, and Benjamin Crump is always there to chide on the protesters and keep them going. Keep them angry. And once again, you notice that he's there for every single one of these. Alright, let's keep going. From the Daily Wire, anti-police rioters attacked police officers who were putting out fires in Louisville, from Ryan Saavedra. Anti-police rioters, identified by journalists as allegedly being Black Lives Matter and Antifa extremists, attacked law enforcement officials in Louisville, Kentucky on Wednesday night, who were putting out fires that the rioters had started. The riots broke out after a grand jury declined on Wednesday to charge 3 police officers with the death of Breonna Taylor, who died during a raid earlier this year. And nobody gave one butt-fuck ounce of credence to until after George Floyd was killed in police custody. Let me rephrase that. Until after George Floyd died in police custody. One of the officers was charged with 3 counts of wanton endangerment for recklessly firing his weapon during the raid. Journalists shared videos of the violence that broke out in Louisville later in the day, which included alleged Black Lives Matter activists setting fire to a courthouse in Louisville. Videos showed law enforcement officials moving in to put out the fires. One officer was struck by a projectile that was thrown at them and was knocked to the ground. The officers were then pelted with various projectiles thrown by the violent rioters.
Burn it down!
state law, this is an unlawful assembly. I command all present and so assembled here to immediately and peacefully disperse. If you do not do so, you may dispense chemical agents and you may be arrested.
You guys got a paintball gun. Or a pepperball gun, I guess that could be.
This is the Louisville Metro Police Department. Under Kentucky state law, this is an unlawful assembly. And I command all persons so assembled to immediately and peacefully disperse. If you do not do so, you may dispense chemical agents and you will be arrested.
Charming. Charming. All right, that's all that I'm going to read or listen to off of this one here. But yeah, that's where it's all getting started here. That's what the riots are going to start out looking like, and I got a feeling we're going to see a few days of this as well. So let's keep going. From ABC 11 Eyewitness News, 2 Louisville officers shot amid Breonna Taylor protests. From Dylan Loven and Piper Hudspeth Blackburn over at the Associated Press, providing to ABC 11. Hours after a Kentucky grand jury brought no charges against Louisville police for Breonna Taylor's death and protesters took to the streets, authorities said 2 officers were shot and wounded Wednesday night during the demonstrations, expressing anger over the killings of black people at the hands of police. Interim Louisville Police Chief Robert Schrader said a suspect was in custody, but did not offer details about whether that person was participating in the demonstrations. He said both officers are expected to recover, and one is undergoing surgery. He says the officers were shot after investigating reports of gunfire at an intersection where there was a large crowd. Several shots rang out as protesters in downtown Louisville tried to avoid police blockades, moving down an alleyway as officers lobbed pepper balls, according to an Associated Press journalist. People covered their ears, ran away, and frantically looked for places to hide. Police with long guns swarmed the area. Then officers in riot gear and military-style vehicles blocked off the roadways. The violence comes after prosecutors said 2 officers who fired their weapons at Taylor, a black woman, were justified in using force to protect themselves after they faced gunfire from her boyfriend. The only charges were 3 counts of wanton endangerment against fired officer Brett Hankison for shooting into a home next to Taylor's with people inside. The FBI is still investigating potential violations of federal law in connection with the raid at Taylor's home on March 13th. Ben Crump, a lawyer for Taylor's family, denounced the decision as outrageous and offensive as protesters shouting, "No justice, no peace," immediately marched through the streets. Scuffles broke out between police and protesters. Some were arrested. Officers fired flashbangs, and a few small fires burned in a square that's been at the center of the protests. But it had largely cleared out ahead of the nighttime curfew as demonstrators marched through other parts of downtown Louisville. Dozens of patrol cars blocked the city's major thoroughfare, and more police arrived after an officer was shot. While remaining silent on the indictment decision, President Trump expressed his concerns for the 2 officers who were shot. "Praying for the 2 police officers that were shot tonight in Louisville, Kentucky. The federal government stands behind you and is ready to help. Spoke to Governor Andy Beshear, and we are prepared to work together immediately upon request." Demonstrators also marched in cities like New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and Philadelphia. And this goes back into the review. Actually, I want to point this paragraph out here before we get into this. Along with the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota, Taylor's case became a major touchstone for nationwide protests that have drawn attention to entrenched racism and demanded police reform. Taylor's image had been painted on streets, emblazoned on protest signs, and silk-screened on t-shirts. And yet, once again, nobody gave a damn about Breonna Taylor until after George Floyd died from a fentanyl overdose in police custody. Nobody cared until after George Floyd. Keep that in mind as we come and watch this going forward. All right, let's keep going from this one here. I've got one from the Blaze. Louisville Police Department says 1 suspect in custody after 2 officers shot during Breonna Taylor protest. From Carlos Garcia, the interim chief of Louisville Police Department said that the suspect was in custody after the shooting of 2 officers during the violent protests over the death of Breonna Taylor. Interim Police Chief Robert Schrader said in a short media briefing on Wednesday evening that the 2 officers were in stable condition and that one was undergoing surgery. Schrader said that police were responding at about 8:30 p.m. to a call of shots being fired at the corner of 1st and Broadway streets, when more shots rang out and 2 police were struck. Those police were taken to University Hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Various videos taken during the shooting were circulated on social media soon afterward, including one reportedly from the police live stream from their Facebook page.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Good? I'm good. You all good?
We're good.
Everybody here? Good? What does it say? Are you good?
I'm good. I'm good.
Fuck!
Stay down.
Where do you want us to go?
Right there. Right there. Officer down. Right there. Officer down.
Yes. Yes. Okay. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Right here. Right here.
Oh, we got an officer down.
Officer down. They're backing officers out.
Officer down. So, yeah, I mean, it was a wild night over in Louisville. It absolutely was. So, let's keep going from this one. I'm going to ditch this one for Monday, but let's keep going. This is from the Gateway Pundit, but it's from Cassandra Fairbanks, who I've been listening to on multiple streams. I trust Cassandra Fairbanks, otherwise I normally wouldn't use Gateway Pundit. U-Haul seen distributing shields, potential weapons to Louisville rioters, rented to Holly Zoller of Soros-connected Louisville Bail Project. The U-Haul that began distributing riot supplies in Louisville immediately following the announcement that no officers would be charged for Breonna Taylor's death was rented to Holly Zoller of the Louisville Bail Initiative. The pre-parked truck was loaded with shields, painted with anti-police messages, umbrellas, gas masks, and other riot supplies. Zoller confirmed it was her in a phone call from a concerned citizen who pretended to work for the rental company. You can listen to it in full at the end of the article, which it's archived, so we won't be able to, unfortunately, but U-Haul employee leaked logs providing that Zoller was the one who rented the truck. So, yeah, the bail project is out there and making sure that they're getting out here, getting ready to riot. Which makes, I mean, you knew what was happening. It's not like this is a big secret that these bail fund projects are out there supporting the riots. So, that is what it is. Let's keep going from this one. From the Daily Wire. U-Haul truck hands out riot shield supplies to BLM protesters in Louisville. From Emily Zanotti. Demonstrators in Louisville, Kentucky, protesting the outcome of a grand jury investigation into Breonna Taylor's death, received a fresh supply of riot shields, signs, and supplies from a U-Haul van Wednesday afternoon, indicating substantial pre-planning. Daily Caller's Julio Rosas was on the scene in Louisville Wednesday afternoon, recording the crowd's reaction to a grand jury decision indicting only one officer for crimes related to Breonna Taylor's death. As the Daily Wire reported earlier, Sergeant Brett Hankinson was indicted on 3 counts of wanton endangerment in the first degree for discharging his service weapon into 3 apartments during the execution of a warrant on Taylor's apartment. None of the other officers or investigators were charged, and Kentucky's Attorney General noted in a press conference that officers knocked and announced before executing the warrant, a fact corroborated, he said, by witness accounts. Witness accounts also indicate that Kenneth Walker, Taylor's companion, fired at the officers first. Demonstrations were taking place in Louisville Wednesday evening, however, as Rosas noted, and some demonstrators are being actively supplied by outside organizers. While the BLM crowd was marching in Louisville, a U-Haul truck pulled up with shields and supplies for the group to use, Rosas reported.
Hey! Somebody with me on this! Let's go! Let's go, man! Right up!
So, yep, there go all the shields and everything. Brendan Gutenschwager, known as guerrilla reporter at Be Gone the Scene, captured a different angle of the supply delivery. Haters will say it was a Proud Boys plant. So yes, they are absolutely getting ready for this, and that did take some definite pre-planning to go. So, yeah, I mean, you knew it was going to happen. You knew it was going to come. Especially after reading the report. There was no way that there were going to be indictments on all 3 officers. And yet, people are still surprised by this. Let's keep going. I've got one here, a tweet by Josh Fialo. Protesters are now going restaurant by restaurant to chant at diners on Beach Drive in St. Pete. A lot of diners yelling back, starting multiple confrontations. This one was the most significant. Protesters took over a couple's table, not sure why they were targeted specifically. And I got this from Jen the Libertarian, who pointed out the fact that, if it was her husband at the table, somebody was probably going to walk away with a bullet in him. And honestly, if it was me sitting there and my girlfriend was sitting with me and they did that, that'd probably be the same thing.
Stand up, fight back! Stand up, fight back!
This is my
So that was the scene at the table there. Let's keep going. From the Blaze, protesters harassed diners at Florida following Breonna Taylor's decision in Kentucky. Protesters in St. Petersburg, Florida expanded their demonstration to harass diners along the street on Wednesday following a Louisville grand jury's decision not to charge officers involved in a raid that led to the death of Breonna Taylor in March. A reporter for the Tampa Bay Times reported on Twitter that protesters are now going restaurant by restaurant to chant at diners on Beach Street Drive in St. Pete. We read that one already. The footage in the accompanying video shows a mob of protesters repeatedly chanting "Stand up, fight back" while facing diners at a restaurant before one apparent activist pulls up a seat at the table of a man and woman who are seated together outside the establishment. The woman at the table quickly stands up and says, "Nope, this is my table," and unsuccessfully attempts to move the activist from the chair before two more activists fill the remaining empty seats while flashing signs and joining the chant. Additional activists followed and stood to surround the table. One activist can be heard telling the man, "Why don't you shut up?" before the first activist, who stole a seat, told the woman, "I'll knock your old ass boyfriend the fuck out." Another activist is then seen blowing what happens to be a bullhorn at the couple standing from a few feet away. So, yeah, charming. And once again, if it was me, just me by myself, there's a 50-50 shot that there probably would have been a bolt in somebody. If it was me and my girlfriend sitting at the table, 100% somebody's going down for that one. Alright, let's keep going here. Alright, we're going to move off Breonna Taylor at this point and move into Kenosha, as I've got one on that. From the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Kenosha protesters sue Facebook and armed men they say helped incite the violence through social media. From Bruce Vilmetti. 4 people who were protesting in Kenosha the night of August 25th, including the girlfriend of a man who was killed by Kyle Rittenhouse during the unrest, have sued Facebook and 3 armed men they say fomented the violence through social media. The plaintiffs include Hannah Giddings, 23, who watched Anthony Huber, 26, die after he was shot by Rittenhouse, 17. Authorities say he was striking the teen with a skateboard and trying to disarm him shortly after Rittenhouse had shot and killed another man, Joseph Rosenbaum, 36. Other plaintiffs include 2 Kenosha men and a Milwaukee woman who say they were subjected to threats, intimidation, and violence by the defendants. Besides Facebook, the defendants in the federal lawsuit include Rittenhouse, the Illinois resident facing homicide charges, Ryan Balch, a West Bend man who later wrote and spoke out about being with Rittenhouse that night, and Kevin Mathewson, a former Kenosha alderman who formed the Kenosha Guard and used Facebook to call for armed followers to come to the city. Mathewson and Balch have not responded to earlier requests for interviews, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Balch has been immersed in white supremacy. Yeah, well, so has anybody who isn't, I don't know, as black as Eddie Murphy. The Kenosha Guard and the Boogaloo Boys, an informal group that advocates a race war, oh my fucking god, you actually believe that too, are also named as defendants. So, yeah, they're suing Rittenhouse and a bunch of other people off of this because people fucked around and they found out, essentially. Alright, let's keep going here. So, here's the one that is running the news left and right, and people are insanely pissed off about. So, this was probably not a smart thing to say. I will come out and say that right off the bat. This was most likely not an intelligent thing to say. Up on the stage, where people are trying to accuse you of being the dictator that's going to be installed for life. especially at 72 years old when your life isn't even that much longer to begin with. But let's hear what our wonderful president has to say.
Win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville, there's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
So that was probably not the right thing to say. Get rid of the ballots and I'll be president forever. Okay. First off, you should probably have pointed out the mail-in ballots, number one. I would have started there, but I mean, the media fell right into the trap too, because of course the next thing that this is the injecting bleach all over again. He said something remotely adjacent to what they tried to accuse him of. He baited them out, and then they started screeching and screaming about it, just screaming to high heavens about it. So, I wouldn't have put it like that. But now they're out there saying that he wants to just do away with elections. And he said that he was going to. That was the one that got me, is the fact that so many people tweeted out that he said that he was going to do away with elections. No, he didn't say that. And honestly, I'm going to be completely honest with you. This is immediately before the show was the first time I listened to this clip. It came to me last night and I tweeted out about it. You know, I don't even have to listen to this clip to know that he didn't say that he was going to do away with elections. I know for a fact that he didn't say that, but the media outrage machine got up there and accused him of saying that very thing. All right, let's keep going. From Bloomberg. I know this is Ron Helton's favorite source. Bloom butt. Hillary Clinton chides the Senate GOP for Ginsburg replacement rush, from Keith Lang. Yeah, people actually care what Hillary Clinton has to say. Shocking, right? Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the Republicans' rush to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on Supreme Court could spell the end of Obamacare, but that she opposes increasing the size of the court in response. In an interview taped for Bloomberg Equality Summit to take place on Wednesday, Clinton cited Ginsburg's reported last wish that the seat she held since 1993 remain vacant until the presidential election was decided. She was offering a measured opinion that's in the best interest of the country and the court to let the election go forward, said Clinton, who was the 2016 Democratic presidential nominee. She acknowledged that Republicans appear to have the votes to confirm an appointment from President Trump before the November 3rd election. A decision by Republicans led by Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to go forward with the confirming a nominee is a very unfortunate display of partisan power to push through whoever the president nominates, Clinton said. She said that she wouldn't, however, favor a strategy being discussed by some Democrats to increase the size of the court in the event that they win control of the Senate and White House to dilute the conservative majority. She called that idea a step too far. So, yep, I still don't care what Hillary Clinton has to say, but I thought for sure that people would enjoy this one. Of course she's against the Senate GOP. She's against any GOP. All right, let's keep going here. From Ted Cruz, from the Texas Tribune, Ted Cruz blocks the U.S. Senate resolution to honor Ruth Bader Ginsburg, citing a partisan amendment. From Abby Livingston, a ceremonial resolution honoring the life of the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg failed in the Senate Tuesday after U.S. Senator Ted Cruz objected to the language his Democratic counterparts added, noting her dying wish that a successor not be chosen until after the presidential inauguration earlier next year. The war of words on the Senate floor is likely a preamble to a coming brawl to replace Ginsburg. The liberal justice died Friday, leaving a vacancy that, if filled by a conservative, could have a sweeping ramification on several American policies and civil liberties. Unfortunately, the Democratic leader has put forth an amendment to turn that bipartisan resolution into a partisan resolution, Cruz said in his floor remarks, referring to the U.S. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Specifically, the Democrat leader wants to add a statement that Justice Ginsburg's position should not be filled until a new president is installed, purportedly based on a comment Justice Ginsburg made to family members shortly before she passed. That, of course, is not the standard, he added. Under the Constitution, members of the judiciary do not appoint their own successors. Schumer took to the floor immediately after Cruz spoke, stating that he believed Justice Ginsburg would easily see through the legal sophistry of Cruz's argument. He said Cruz turned the late justice's dying words against her, which Schumer said is so beneath the dignity of this body I do not modify. Cruz then objected to the resolution, and it did not pass. Yeah, it's just like everything else at this point. They're trying to put their own little pet projects into every little piece of legislation that they're signing, and you just can't do that. Single issue bills. Permanently. No more pork. Alright, let's keep going here from the Daily Wire. Ruth Bader Ginsburg didn't retire because she wanted Hillary Clinton to name her successor, daughter says, from Tim Pierce. The late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg held off on retirement in part because she thought former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton would win the 2016 presidential election. Ginsburg, daughter says. Ginsburg died on Friday from pancreatic cancer at the age of 87. Many have questioned why she did not step down under former President Barack Obama, especially prior to 2015 when Obama was working with a Democrat-controlled Senate. Ginsburg's dying wish was reportedly that I will not be replaced until a new president is installed, according to her daughter, Jane. Ginsburg continued to sit on the court through 2016, in part because she did not believe President Trump would win the election. Jane told the New York Times, I think that Mother, like many others, expected Hillary would win the nomination and the presidency, and she wanted the first female president to name her successor, she said in an email. Jane also said her mother never voiced regret over her decision to stay on the court after Trump won. Many of Ginsburg's fans, supporters, and friends disagreed with the judge's decision to stay on the court for so long, especially after several bouts of serious illness and cancer. Few, if any, of them ever spoke publicly of their dismay at Ginsburg's decision. However, according to the former New York Times editorial writer Dorothy Samuels, Samuels began interviewing friends and acquaintances of the justice in 2018 in preparation for a book on Ginsburg's life. Staying on the court for spite and hoping that President Trump gets to name your replacement. All right. So Rand Paul apparently confronted Dr. Fauci to his face on the lockdowns. You've been a fan of Cuomo and the shutdown in New York. You lauded New York for their policy. New York had the highest death rate in the world. How could we possibly be jumping up and down and saying Cuomo did a great job? So let's hear what that sounded like.
Initially, government officials were honest enough to admit that the goal of mitigation efforts, aka lockdown, was to flatten the curve. But the area under the curve, the total deaths from the virus, would likely be the same. In other words, the lockdown was to mitigate the spike in viral deaths so our hospitals would not be overwhelmed, but the same amount of people would likely die with or without the lockdown. The media and, frankly, government officials seem to have forgotten this important caveat. Flattening the curve morphed into a belief that we could change the course of the pandemic with an economic lockdown. This is unfortunate and has led to the protracted lockdown recession we are currently mired in. It's important that we examine the data, learn from the data, and try to avoid the man-made aspect of this calamity in the future. To those who argue that the lockdown flattened the curve in New York and New Jersey, the evidence argues otherwise. New York and New Jersey wound up with the sharpest spike or highest death rate in the world at over 1,700 deaths per million. In contrast, Sweden had a relatively softer touch. Few mandates and mostly voluntary guidelines. Sweden's death rate ended up about a third that of New York and New Jersey. Some might argue that Sweden and New York and New Jersey are different populations, perhaps, but even the average death rate for the U.S. is now greater than Sweden. In fact, The U.S. death rate is quite comparable to less developed parts of the world where social distancing is virtually impossible, such as Brazil, Bolivia, and Ecuador. Which brings us to an important question. Is man really capable of altering the course of an infectious disease through crowd control? The statistics argue a resounding no. The evidence argues that mitigation efforts have failed to flatten the curve, that most countries, regardless of public health policy, suffered a significant spike in deaths and then a gradual decline. Now, some will argue, what about Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, each which have had extraordinarily low death rates? Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South Korea certainly enforce stricter quarantine and contact tracing rules than the U.S., but Japan's rules were largely voluntary since their prime minister lacks the legal powers to enforce a lockdown. One explanation for the low death rate in much of Asia is that the population may have a higher degree of exposure to coronavirus colds, and therefore have more pre-existing cross-reactive immunity. If scientists were interested, there is a fascinating field of inquiry looking at susceptibility to COVID-19 and assessment of whether people not have pre-existing immunity to similar coronaviruses. In fact, pre-existing cross-reactive immunity to coronavirus may explain why we have so many people that have very little symptoms or asymptomatic. While there's still many...
All right, he's just going to keep going on that one, and a lot of that is technical jargon, but yeah, the fact of the matter is he's jumping up and he's actually confronting Fauci to his face, which we need to. I mean, no, did you vote for Fauci? I didn't vote for Fauci. Fauci is an unelected official, and yes, as a doctor, first and foremost, Fauci's priority is making sure people don't get sick, and going to every length possible to do so. I need to turn my camera back on. Yeah, that is his top priority, is to make sure people don't get sick. So he's going to suggest whatever it is, whatever it takes to keep people from getting sick. And he's going to be overcautious, but he doesn't know the other ends of this. He doesn't know the other ends of economy. That's not his wheelhouse. He doesn't know the other end of job creation, job loss. That's not his wheelhouse. His wheelhouse is making sure people don't get sick. And he is an unelected bureaucrat to do so. So, good on Rand. All right, I've got a statement here from the U.S. DOJ. I'm going to just read briefly into this, but it appears that we are going to see a overhaul on Section 230 after all. Today, on behalf of the Trump administration, the Department of Justice sent draft legislation to Congress to reform Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. The draft legislative text implements reforms that the DOJ deemed necessary in its June recommendations and follows a year-long review of the outdated statute. The legislation also executes President Trump's directive from the executive order on preventing online censorship. For too long, Section 230 has provided a shield for online platforms to operate with impunity, said at AG Barr, ensuring that the internet is a safe but also vibrant, open, and competitive environment, and is vitally important to America. We therefore urge Congress to make these necessary reforms to Section 230 and begin to hold online platforms accountable both when they unlawfully censor speech and when they knowingly facilitate criminal activity online. And yeah, I am mixed on this one because, I mean, this is the public square. At this point, this is the point where people gather. This would be the same as people being drug away from the town square in the 18th century when they were having a discussion on ideas. But I also don't want to crack down on a private company. And I know they come out and say all the time, well, go make your own social media platform if you don't like it. And that's true. You can always go and do that, but the fact of the matter is that Twitter and Facebook have become so powerful that they do everything they can to try and shut these things down. YouTube is trying to shut BitChute down. They're trying to shut Minds down. They're trying to shut Gab down. Well, Gab kind of is a little bit off the deep end, but they're trying to shut all these other ones down because people are making their own social media, but they can't control the speech if they go to another social media site. They're trying to shut Discord down or trying to make it into such a censored place that nobody can be there. What's Midget B been banned 4 times at this point from Discord? But I don't. And I've read through the majority of this. And honestly, like I said, I'm on the fence with this one. I definitely am. But I know that one day I'm going to get thrown off Twitter and YouTube probably. And I know that right now, too, I haven't seen the tweet. I'm going to prep that for tomorrow. But Christensen pointed out, and then Tim Hool confirmed, that yes, YouTube is going to start throwing a lot more things into age restriction, which means that you have to be signed into YouTube to see any of the videos, any of the live streams, any of the replays, which is going to take away a lot of the ability for a lot of YouTubers to make money. And frankly, to get their voices out. Alright, I've just got 2 more here, then we'll do a thing that I like and a thing that I hate, and head on out of here. Head on over to the Daily Ignoramus is what we'll do after this. This is stupid. This was almost the thing that I hate, but I found something even more egregious at the end. California governor signs order banning sales of new gasoline cars by 2035 from Lauren Summer and Scott Newman. California will phase out the sale of all gasoline-powered vehicles by 2035 in a bid to lead the U.S. in reducing greenhouse gas emissions by encouraging the state's drivers to switch to electric cars. Fact check. We already lead the world in reduction of emissions, so. And you still need to have some sort of energy generation more than what you already have in California. Your electric grid is already failing, and you want to put more stress on it. I mean, do what it is you want to do, but your energy grid is failing. And yet you want to put more stress up on this. I wonder what Britt has to say. I wonder what my cousin has to say about this. I've got a cousin that actually does drift racing, I believe, down in California. I'm going to get in contact with him and see what he has to say about this. Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order on Wednesday that amounts to the most aggressive clean car policy in the United States. Although it bans the sale of new gas cars and trucks after the 15-year deadline, it will still allow such vehicles to be owned and sold on the used car market. So they're grandfathered in until they die, essentially. But I'm sure there'll be buybacks and, they'll come in and, we'll buy your old clunker, cash for clunker shit, and then they'll go and drill a hole through the block like they did under Obama's Cash for Clunkers program. They lost so many good cars on that program because people they had a brake problem in their car. And they brought it in for cash for clunkers. And then the dealerships were supposed to drill a hole through the block so they couldn't be resold after the cash for clunkers thing. So even, if you had worn brake pads, a warped brake rotor, or something wrong in your front end, they were making sure that you couldn't fix this thing back up and put it up on the road. And we lost a lot of good cars because of that. Our cars shouldn't make wildfires worse and create more... Jesus fucking Christ, they're still on that. Oh, the wildfires are from climate change. No, they fucking weren't. I'm not going to say what they were from because YouTube will shut this stream down, but they weren't from climate change. Our cars shouldn't make wildfires worse and create more days filled with smoky air. Cars shouldn't melt glaciers or raise sea levels, threatening our cherished beaches and coastlines. Newsom, a Democrat... Oh, shit. Also threw his support behind a ban on petroleum fracking, but called on the California legislature to make that change. With extreme wildfires still burning in the state, Newsom says fighting climate change is an emergency. However, the state's efforts have run afoul of the Trump administration, which has sought to revoke California's authority to mandate zero-emission vehicles, a challenge that has landed in court. Yeah, no, Trump, you actually can't do that. That is actually against the Constitution. You're fighting against what we're trying to fight for as far as federalism and making states' rights a priority. You can't actually do that. But yes, they are going to ban the sale of gasoline cars in California. All right. Next one here. This came to me from the Beauty and the Beta Frozen North server over on Discord. Thanks to Scary for putting this up in here. From MSN News via CNN, the New York town of Swastika votes to keep its name. from Taylor Romine. A small town in upstate New York voted to keep the name swastika, saying that the town founders named it after the Sanskrit word and not the hate symbol associated with the Nazis. The town of Blackbrook Town Board, which has domain over the hamlet, voted unanimously to not change the name. John Douglas, supervisor of the town of Blackbrook, told CNN, "Swastika was named by the town's original settlers in the 1800s and is based off the Sanskrit word meaning well-being, according to Douglas. We regret that individuals out of the area that lack the knowledge of the history of our community become offended when they see the name," Douglas said. "To the members of our community that the board represents, it is the name that their ancestors chose." The vote follows a national reckoning with what the hate symbol means in modern America. In April of 2019, a neighborhood in Colorado outside Denver voted to change its name from Swastika Acres to Old Cherry Hills. The area had once been home to the Denver Land Swastika Company, a company that chose its name before the Nazis adopted the swastika symbol. The term swastika is derived from the Sanskrit word svastika, which means good fortune. According to the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum, the symbol first appeared about 7,000 years ago and is considered a sacred symbol in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and other belief systems. It sometimes adorns the walls of houses or temples. Yeah, I'm sure that it doesn't do that in Germany. So, Swastika New York keeps its name. All right, that's all we have for the news for the day. And we're going to close out today with a thing that I like and a thing that I hate, and then we're going to head on out of here. So, thing that I like today. From The Blaze, leftist leans her body out car window amid traffic to flip off Trump fans. Then cops pay her a visit and much glee ensues. This was the best thing ever. From Dave Urbanski, we don't know when or where the video was recorded, but our funny bones sure are glad it exists. A woman behind the wheel of a car during daytime traffic, and according to Twitter user WOP45, she becomes enraged at attendees at a rally in support of President Trump. So triggered was she that the motorist is heard on the clip screaming obscenities, especially "fuck Donald Trump," and she underscores her rage with the middle finger. But the Trump fans just happily hoot and holler back at her, and then she loses it. You see, while her bird flip takes place as she sits in the driver's seat in a stationary vehicle, the outraged woman next act is offering a second message to Trump faithful, a double middle finger as she leans her body out the window, no seatbelt employed, natch while her car is in motion. Oops. At that point, she apparently comes to her senses, realizes she's not paying attention to traffic, and slams on the brakes. The Twitter poster says she hit the vehicle in front of her. The Trump fans do let out a rousing yell, up with applause, after her sudden stop. But it's not clear from the clip if she actually bumps the vehicle in front of her or not. Whatever actually happened in those few seconds, there's no mistaking the pair of police officers who walk up to her window. Maybe they saw her without her seatbelt and not paying attention to the traffic. Maybe she did indeed hit the vehicle in front of her. Who knows? Alright. Let's watch this one. I still have the audio on. Yes? Yes, I do. Let's watch that one again. I thought you guys would enjoy that. I enjoyed that. That's funny. Alright, now we'll do a thing that I hate. So, from newsletter ByronCrawford.com, writes, "Life in a Shantytown. Internets." This actually says what I'm about to read to you, by the way. No one wants to be sexually harassed in the workplace, but everyone would like to think that they're worthy of being sexually harassed in the workplace. When I was sexually harassed at White Castle back in the mid-2000s, causing me to walk off the line mid-shift, it was one of the most difficult times in my life. But it was nice to know that somebody wanted to take advantage of me. It gets worse. My concern is that not enough black women are being sexually harassed in the media. In the past few weeks, literally hundreds of women have come forward to allege sexual harassment, and worse, against Harvey Weinstein, James Toback, Brett Ratner, et alia, and a few, if any, of them have been black. Lupita Nyong'o accused Harvey Weinstein of trying to pull the legendarily effective massage gambit after spotting her in a play while she was still in college, prompting Weinstein to take a break from his one-week stint in sex rehab to declare that he would never sexually harass Lupita Nyong'o. Some of our most astute cultural commentators, including possibly people from the since-shuttered Teen Vogue, pointed out that Weinstein never issued individual rebuttals to any of his white alleged victims. This was literally untrue, in much the same way that it's not true that the RZA waited a year to reveal that Russell Crowe spit on Azalea Banks. But it felt true, which is all that matters. Why wouldn't Harvey Weinstein sexually harass Lupita Nyong'o? She's adorable. Nyong'o won an Oscar a few years ago, albeit for acting in one of the slave movies. In one of the most memorable scenes for me personally from 12 Years a Slave, Chiwetel Ejiofor is forced by Michael Fassbender to whip Nyong'o for leaving the plantation to get some soap, thus reinforcing the idea that black men are incapable of or unwilling to protect black women. A few years later, Gabrielle Union's character in the movie Birth of a Nation fell victim to what's known in obscure fanfiction writing communities as steamy non-con sex. She wasn't rewarded for her effort with an Oscar in part because The Birth of a Nation was blackballed after a false rape accusation against director Nate Parker from the late 90s list. Once it was clear the movie wasn't going anywhere, Union publicly distanced herself from Nate Parker despite the fact that he'd been found not guilty in a court of law, raising the question, why shouldn't black men feel obligated to protect black women when black women aren't willing to return the favor? So this goes on into some very, very racially charged language, but right off in the beginning, not enough black women are being sexually harassed in the media. I have no words for this. This is quite possibly the dumbest take on the internet. Nobody wants to be sexually harassed, but it's nice to feel like I could be sexually harassed. Are you fucking serious? You are just stepping back. All of this Me Too stuff that they've been trying to push forward. And if they get a resolution, we might not have to hear about it again. But no. So yes, this actually happens. This is actually put out there. I mean, equality and everything, I guess, but my God. Harvey Weinstein only picked on white women. He didn't assault and try to rape black women. Well, on that endearing note here, we are going to call it a show. So, thanks everybody for checking out Contemporary. We will be back here tomorrow for more Contemporary and more news. I'm sure that we'll be watching more of the Breonna Taylor thing and more of the efforts out of Louisville to try and burn the city down. And we will be back here later on tonight with more Ed's Gaming. We are almost to the end of New Vegas. We're almost there. Probably 1 or 2 episodes away from closing that game out. So, join up tonight and see the end credits roll either tonight or next Thursday. Or join us here tomorrow for more Contemporary. Until then, I'm Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary.